All right. Does anyone have any questions about last week? There were some things we talked about, quite a lot of it of things that we talked about that has created any conflict or problems or issues in understanding. Just to remind us, it was on intentional listening. In intentional listening, I indicated, let's see if you can recall, had two components associated with intentional listening. Do you recall what they were?
I think it was their attention and empathy.
Empathic
Oh,
listening.
that's pretty good. Who said that?
That was me.
Grace.
Grace. That was awesome, Grace.
Thank you.
Yes, bare attention and empathic response. Bare attention, as you recall, is attention. This is pure attention that is absent of non-judgment. So it's also referred to as non-judgmental awareness, right? The ability to sustain bare attention allows the listener to see. You recall to see the nature of thoughts, of feelings, sensations, experiences. Yes.
Yep.
So what I mean by the nature of, let's say, a thought is, if a child is speaking or anyone, oh, that's much more clear.
You're
All I saw
staring at the
were
ceiling.
heads. So what I mean by the nature of thoughts, let's say, for instance, when you are engaging with another human being, whether it's a child or any other person or a staff member or someone outside of the grove, you are just listening through attention. You are listening, and you're able to capture the other person's meaning. So whatever they are thinking, and they're sharing with you what they are thinking when uh, you are engaged in bare attention or bare witnessing. You are only you're trying to notice what that child is indicating, what the child is experiencing, which allows you to come in contact with the meaning of that thought. Okay. So empathic response is essentially just a response that reflects, if you recall, thoughtful consideration for that person. So when you're listening and you are empathically responding, that makes more sense. Okay. I can see just about everyone. Okay. You are taking thoughtful consideration of the other person's perspective. So there is this process of listening that is engaged in listening itself. Okay. So that's a summary of what we spoke about last week. You recall also I referred to intentional listening as our greatest intervention. It is also considered the solution for helping and healing. So it's a restorative process for the person who's being listened to, as well as the person who is listening at, right? So keep that all in mind. I will reiterate these things from time to time because I think there's a tendency for us to lax, meaning that we have difficulty really listening because we're engaging in conversation. We're engaging in this limerent fantasy with that other person that we are talking to or speaking to, where we're having a conversation with that person in our mind, which prepares us for a response. So this can be very problematical, especially when you're working with children, but not necessarily children alone. But when you are engaging with another human being and you're truly not listening, although you're engaging in the process of listening, um, and because it lacks deep listening or compassionate listening, which is listening with kindness or open-heartedness, if we're not engaging in that kind of listening, it will be very difficult to fully recognize what the other person is experiencing. And we also talked about listening to the divine, and I described the divine as the child. When you're listening to the child that is divine, which then gives us a whole different perspective. When we're able to recognize that the child exists in the divine, okay, exists rather as the divine. Okay. There's a concept I want to throw out there that's kind of related to what we spoke about last week, and that concept may be familiar with some of you, but I think it's a neat concept, and it's referred to as sonder. Isn't that, if you're familiar with this concept, there's a part of you is probably fascinated by the idea of it. So essentially, Saunders, the potential, it's this feeling that we experience that, like every person, how many people watching right now can you tell? Like, does it state the name of people where you're at?
Yeah, right now we've got 4 viewers. And then one of those viewers is us at the school, which has 4 people watching. So I'm not sure. We've got a
4
Samsung
viewers?
and then Dakota's mom. And I imagine one of your colleagues.
Wendy?
Yeah, Wendy.
Oh, okay, that goes on. Okay. So 4, including you 4. So there's 8, including myself 9.
That sounds about
I
right.
asked. I asked because I want to use the concept of Sonder as an example. So I'll define it again, is this whole idea that every person you see or you notice or you recognize in life as full and as complex as you are. So the person that's sitting next to you is equally as complex and profound in their own right. So I asked that question because I want to be able to extend that recognition. So it's not the 4 that I see right now, including myself, the 5, which would make the 5, the 5th. There are 4 other viewers. So my ability to recognize that each and every one of us has our own life, or we are full of life, and we are complex in our own right, allows us to be empathic. So each of us have our own thoughts or experiences, and we have our own stories. And even if we have the same story, maybe the story that we all have, all 9 of us have right now, is the story of this experience that is an experience that Dr. Tran is speaking. But within that story, within this particular story, you will have a story behind your own story, meaning as you are listening to me, even though we're sharing an experience that is this talk, it is very likely that at some point in time, the past 10 minutes or so since I started speaking, you have had thoughts. Now, these thoughts may be relevant to what I say, meaning you're able to make sense of what I say, or these thoughts may elicit questions, inquiry, or there could be neutral thoughts. It's neither good nor bad. But nonetheless, the point is, Saunders' experience that helps us to recognize that we are complex. And because we are complex, it helps us to foster more empathy for other people. So in the context of the space, the grove, every child walks in, and you recall I say is a rainbow in and of herself. So we recognize that each child comes in with their own experience. No child, even if the kids have the same parents, because they have different personalities, there are different nuances of perception and gradients of awareness that um, that facilitates for them a different response to life, a different understanding of life, a different experience for life. So the fact that we are different in that way is it's just not our fingerprint. Each one has their own print that is uniquely associated with their own identity. But even consciousness, the way we're conscious, we can speak consciousness in general. Like I may be inclined to say, we all are aware and we're capable of awareness. But we have to be very cautious and recognize that even within the realm of awareness, we are potentially different in terms of how it creates or shifts our perception. And I said in, I think one of the talks I mentioned how um, we may have different levels of consciousness, but whatever consciousness or version of consciousness we have that we contain shapes our awareness. So our experiences shapes our awareness. There are many factors that come into play that shapes the way we are aware. So the Sonder is about then recognizing that there is a vastness of depth in every individual's life. And because there is, I am inclined to recognize Dakota or Paul or Grace or Cassie or the 4 other viewers watching us. Now, I have an advantage because I'm familiar with all the people who are watching this video. So I recognize each of you as being special in your own right. So you have your own version of awareness and your own version of thoughtfulness, your own version of experiences. But with Sonder, it is particularly more fascinating when you encounter a stranger. At least it is for me. I'll give you an example. I earlier today we drove to lunch about 20 minutes from where we're at. We're in Denver, by the way. But this individual, we are in Colorado Springs, and the traffic is heavy duty here during certain times. But this particular time, we were going for lunch and driving through traffic. Someone pulled in front of me, within probably a couple of feet, 2 feet, a foot. And my immediate response was startle. This is something I had anticipated even before we arrived here to Colorado. But that's the nature of traffic, right? In any case, my secondary response was, I assume that person driving is a human being with consciousness, with perceptions, right? With a past, with experiences. So it became a moment in time that allowed me to appreciate the moment that is the individual who almost collided with me. And the person was perhaps in a rush, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is, in this process of Sonder, I sit with this situation, and it often pertains to another human being, the concept Sonder. And it is particularly interesting to me because this is a perfect stranger, which I have never encountered before, but yet I have taken deep interest in this individual's life. So every child, regardless of, in this case, every child in the grove that enters the grove will be somewhat of a stranger to us. And as such, we engage in sonder, particular interest in the child for the child's own sake. And this is particular interest. We're not just accepting the child into the space just because we can. It's more trying to set a space for ourselves within the context of our connection with these kids and even with the staff members that we will be working with. And through this experience, we're developing deeper perspective, deeper empathy, a deeper connection. You probably notice, if not, but I'm imagining if you can see the video, you probably notice that the sun's hitting my face. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So what does that mean, right? In the context of perspective, right? So Sonder, what it does is it contrasts egocentrism. You recall we kind of talked about that concept once upon a time, the ego, about the ego and the tendency to be egocentric. And the issue with ego centric existence is that we're subject to judgment and criticism. We are subject to making assumptions. And the fact that we do, and this is a good gauge for all of you out there, the moment that you make an assumption, even if you feel like that assumption is accurate or right about your circumstances or other people, I only caution you when you do that, because when we do that, we're inclined to be less empathic and wholly less humble. And because we can be less empathic and less humble, it is likely that we may see or perceive our perspective as the only perspective that really matters, even though we know that there are more than one perspective and we know that there's more than one idea that exists. The bane of egocentric thinking or fallacy is the belief that our perspective is more important than the next. Yeah, especially when you're engaging with children, the child has a disadvantage of sorts because you will use your life experience against that child, whether you do that outwardly or when you are interpreting what the child is experiencing. So a lot of the reasons why we offer advice is because we feel like we know better. And then when we get stuck in that line of thinking, we lose the appreciation for the immediate experience. And that's part of the definition of Sonder. Once one has recognized that the life of another is as special, unique, and complex as ours, we engage in the process of deep appreciation that requires no spoken language, that does not require any expression of interest, um, that does not require from us anything special. You recall when I spoke last week, and I said to you that when you're engaging with a child, you need not create a remarkable, phenomenal experience for the child, because the child is already demonstrating that for us. We just have to be sonder. We just have to recognize that the child is in and of herself complex in her own right. And hesitate responding is equivalent to being aware, is equivalent to being conscious of what's going on in the moment. So this is what it means to be conscious. Okay. And so to be conscious here is one part aware, but there's a complex process of recognizing, of being able to make sense of our situation is a very difficult thing to do. So going back to the example of the person who pulled in front of me, traffic, for me to be able to make sense of that is a difficult thing to do, because my response was an immediate emotional response, which was startled by it. Right now, it could have led to frustration or anger or even rage. Right. So it is very important in this case to be able to, when I say conscious, engage in the process of making sense. And I'm not saying specifically to make sense of what that person had done to me, but rather, because we're conscious collaborators, we're making sense of how we are responding or reacting to the experience that that person had done to me. So in this case, every child that enters the purview of your experience, you're not necessarily trying to make effort or sense to understand the child per se. That's just a small part of it. But the conscious collaborator, the conscious part by definition, states that what we're doing is being aware of ourselves. And when you can, that's what you find yourself. And when you found yourself, you you become more legitimate, meaning that you put yourself in a situation where you are completely aware. Um, Questions or comments at this point before I continue? Am I able to hear the viewers, or?
Yeah, you should be able to hear us.
We're the only ones that are unmuted though. Everyone else.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying.
Yes.
All right.
Me and Maria there too. Is there, when you were talking about that like staying conscious in the moment of the child and what consciousness looks like, there's that awareness piece and the making sense piece. Could you talk a little bit about at those moments where we'll have some sympathetic joy that might be going on as well? What does that look like?
Sympathetic joy. Oh, 1 second for me here. So you remember that concept, huh?
Yeah, I think was that your first or second training? Second?
Yes. Yes, you are correct. And I talked about the importance of the process of sympathetic joy, where I refer to joy as an experience only a child can have. In adults, not so much. Now, that's not necessarily true. I'm just trying to make an argument to shift your perspective so that you can understand greater. So what I said was that only a child can experience joy, an adult cannot. It's not possible because we are constantly engaging in judgment, in judging the experience, which is the now. Then how is not easily comprehensible. It's not easily palpable. It's not something that we can grasp because we're engaging in judgment. Now, what I do offer is that the adult is capable of experiencing what's referred to as sympathetic joy. And that essentially is an experience to answer your question, Paul, when I'm with a child and I'm experiencing a sympathetic joy, I am rejoicing in the experience that the child is having that has nothing to do with me. So as the definition goes, it is not possible for us to experience joy entirely until we have experienced it through the eyes of a child. Because the joy that the child experiences is unadulterated. It's not tainted. It's natural until it's not, meaning until we interfere, until we intervene. Yes. Now, sure, I've had clients in my office who have said to me, here's an example I commonly use, who have said to me, I am most joyful or only joyful when I'm up in the mountains. Now, we could make an argument for that, and I do not doubt that the person is, because probably that is about the only time that they're content. And then when they come off the mountain, reality hits again, right? And then they're not as joyful. But we do find experiences of joy in certain activities. The issue I have is that it is temporary joy. So anything that is temporary or conditional cannot be real entirely. Now, again, um, I'm enjoying this experience taking a break now. I'm in Colorado Springs. I'm going to Comic-Con and I can already anticipate joy, my own joy in the experience. But I noticed that as I'm imagining and anticipating joy, as I imagine all these people in their costumes, that there is a secondary experience of joy or a sympathetic joy that I am anticipating, joy that my kiddo will enjoy the experience, a joy that I will encounter people who are probably in their own way conscious in their personal experience of them in the moment. Um, so, going back to the question, so we can experience a version of joy, and that primary joy, the joy for the joy's sake, is the experience in the grove is had or come to when we can recognize the child in his or her own state. So that means, let's say, even if the child is having a difficult time, you can actually find or engage in sympathetic joy in that experience. Now, not joyful because the child is probably upset, but the fact that the child has a value in that experience, no matter what the experience, good, bad, or neutral, is a phenomenal experience. which allows us to recognize that the child is a human being. That should bring about joy, right? So joy is not just sitting atop the mountain and being happy. You know, you can find joy taking out a bag of garbage. So it's a matter of perspective, right? A matter of perspective in the sense that if you can be present as you're taking out garbage, you recognize that you have hands that can hold up the garbage, or feet that can get you to the garbage, the garbage can, right? Or container. So I know it may be unrealistic to maintain this kind of thinking, and I'm not entirely expecting our CCs or our conscious collaborators to be all conscious or ever conscious. Um, I'm just giving examples out here that will be impressioned on your mind. In this case, the next time you take out garbage, it will be a different experience for you. Now, as I'm saying that, I will follow up with this. It's not about the garbage. It's not about the garbage. It's just about awareness. Awareness in our experience, whether sitting atop a mountain or taking out garbage or talking to another or engaging with another human being, right? So it's about the awareness in these experiences.
Can I have a quick question? When it comes to talking about like Sonder, and is there a point where you can almost become too hyper conscious, where I take like the driving story for example, like starting to recognize your feelings and reactions in that, and also recognize that this is another human being, and you're starting to really focus on that and see that, can you almost kind of like tunnel vision and lose the big picture of what's going on? I just think like, as I'm imagining it, as you're sitting here taking it in, especially with kids, is there a certain level where you almost your consciousness starts to focus itself to try to take more of it in? Does that make sense?
The way that you describe it, it does. But I'm taking deep consideration what you are conveying. I can see, you can help me, Dakota. I can see what you mean, because then it becomes, when you refer to as hyper conscious or hyper aware. Yes, because there's a fixation of sorts where you can be obsessed in an experience. Like I've said this before, sometimes we can be hyper conscious, and because we lose all form of uh, experience. Um, so I'm hoping that what I'm trying to convey is that we are capable of what's called meta consciousness versus hyper consciousness. So in this case, awareness, there's an aspect of being aware that I am aware that I'm offering myself this perspective about the person who just pulled in front of me. And it is followed by the act of compassion, which is to take consideration what this person's life is like. I even go as far as to think about how much He may be loved by his family. And I don't want to interrupt that. I don't want to interfere. I don't want to disrupt that by honking at him, right? Because I think so. I guess what I'm trying to say is that every bit of our experiences, just seeing you sitting there, just sitting itself, an experience that when I see you sit shapes my perspective of myself because I can be aware. Um, if you, let's say, if you were dead, certainly you would not be sitting there. And I've imagined the possibility of having met others who were also part of this process. Now, I guess that's just the way my perspective plays itself out. But when I asked earlier how many people there were here, the ultimate or real reason why I asked that was because I wanted to make sure that I was acknowledging the audience, even though they're not able to communicate with me, and they are because they are listening. I venture to guess that they're listening right now, right? All of you too. Well, I see Grace sitting there or Paul sitting there and sort of looking down. Every one of those experiences, I take note because, as I said, within each of these experiences, it shapes my life in the sense of how I am to be aware. Now, Dakota, um, I may not have addressed your questions, but I was just responding in relation to what I felt. To your question, did you want to elaborate more on what you said, or?
I feel like that was suitable for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I'm very cautious, even though. So you know what? When I was thinking about the person who pulled in front of me, and I went off on this sort of cognitive tangent about his family, and I wished them well. It also facilitated for me the understanding that within the confine of my car, sat behind me, Jay, and sat beside me, Vivi. So I think that's the kind of transformative thought of this as you said, meta conscious awareness. That is the version of awareness that allows us to be privy to our experiences as it is happening in the moment. You see, so my point is, when you're working with children, I will know exactly how many kids will be there for that day. And I take that into deep consideration. Let's say there are 10 kids who show up for that day. Each of these kids will be acknowledged. And I don't mean relationally. It's good to see you, Dakota. I don't
Yes.
just mean,
I will finish listening.
okay, this one's for you. So it doesn't mean I will impose on them entirely, right? So that I can reach out to help to recognize them, but I keep them in the space of my awareness. Cassie, there you are. I thought you left. Just kidding.
I cut her off.
Anyway, um, did I don't know, Paul? Did that make sense? My explanation? I know it wasn't your
Yes.
question, but
Yeah, I'll have to ask Dakota later. I didn't quite grasp his question entirely. I had an idea maybe in my own mind of what he was asking. But for me, as you guys were talking, I think the intentional listening, what we're going over today, the Saunders effect, is that what you called it? There's so much
yeah,
to take in, I can forget the vocabulary sometimes.
yeah,
I feel like that is just helping us, setting ourselves up for having these sympathetic joy experiences. And I think when we're in the Grove working with kids as conscious collaborators, that's kind of the maybe not the point, but kind of the pinnacle. Those are the moments that make your job really rewarding, I think. So for me, that was just kind of the connection going on by using these approaches. And then you could probably add being truly present, right? Like being very aware, being conscious, so we can be in the moment and notice when we're, falling into these stories we might tell ourselves that pulls us out of consciousness, and being able to make sense of ourselves in the space. It kind of reminds me of almost like I'm a video game character, right? And I can kind of just see what I'm doing and what everybody else is doing. And I want to be able to stay at that bird's eye view mostly, right? And not get caught up in my emotions. And then all of a sudden I'm lost in my own character.
Cassie, did you have something to say?
No.
Okay. Yes, the perspective that meditators use to describe their experience is to look at an object of meditation from a bird's eye view, or the concept that you were using. So yes, a lot of that is the process of a conscious being. I'm familiar with some of the people who are listening, who I invited, by the way, the viewers, and these particular individuals have that capacity. They're capable of recognizing uh, what is there, and they can observe. Anyways, I better move on. What I guess bottom line before I move on to the next concept is that I implied that Sonder and to have Saunders to be aware, and that's the important component or piece or part of the Sonder process. The reason why I ask for us to be aware with empathy and humility is because sometimes we can use our awareness against other people. It makes us particularly dangerous. So I want to reiterate, all of you out there, those who are listening, have your version and brand of awareness that I would probably regard as somewhat above average to superior. But again, that's neither here nor there. I think the thing that I want for us at the Grove to recognize, all the conscious collaborators, is that we have to be very careful because we can use our awareness against other people. We will use it to our benefit to try to influence other people, or to try to set them straight, or try to fix them, or try to educate them. We cannot do that. Okay? The child runs his or her universe or innerverse in the way that he or she needs to, without us deforming it, without us trying to reform it or to conform it. Now that's the danger of someone who is conscious, right? You as a conscious person, by definition, you're more conscious than the next person. So because you know you are, you're going to believe that you are more kind than the next person, or more aware than the next person, or more humble than the next person, and more gifted than the next person. That is not our role. That is not our role. We're not trying to outshine the child. We're not trying to outdo the child. We have to be really mindful of this. Okay? All righty. But you probably know that already because you're all conscious entities. It's the ego that I'm speaking to, the one that lives inside all of us, the one that we still need because it's the one that motivates us to do things, but it is also the one that tends to distort our reality as well, right? So we need to be not only conscious but meta conscious. Okay, so I need to move on here. So there's a concept I want to introduce. Again, psychological concept referred to as the Dunning-Kruger effect. So essentially, it's defined as the belief that you may be smarter than other people. So that's a good segue to what I was just speaking. So the reality is that it is not about. We have to recognize here once more. Let me reword this differently. We have to recognize that we are not smarter than the next person. Immediately, when we are uh, thinking that we're going to be very condescending, okay? Uh, even in the even condescending in by way of setting expectations. We think that by setting expectations, expecting that kids have to be a particular way, and we're doing it out of the name, in the name of love, rather, or out of concern. You have to be careful when you're trying to fix other people. Okay. But what the Dunning-Kruger effect really indicates to us is that we have a distorted self-perception. That's why, and so that's, although we think that we are, or believe that rather, that we are smarter than the next person, what it really indicates is that we have a negative, distorted self-perception. And a rhetorical question here, do you know why this is important to understand? What follows that distorted perception, or rather what is associated with that distorted perception, is that a lack of self-awareness. And the suppression of metacognition, the suppression of meta thinking, of meta awareness. I had a mother call me yesterday. That's right, while I'm still here on vacation because it was urgent. Mom walked into the 16-year-old's room and wanted to know, was very under the guise of caring, which is true, the intention was to care, wanted to know more about what's going on in his or her life. The child stood up, walked out of his room, and she said he walked into the bathroom and closed the door and spent some time there. And her response was, "My child's disrespectful, and this will not be allowed. Dr. Tran, what should I do?" My inquiry or question was, "I'm sorry, which part was disrespectful?" And she said, "Well, he got up. First of all, when I'm talking to him, he needs to listen. And secondly, he walked out. That's disrespectful." And my response was, "I'm still confused. You haven't indicated to me how he was disrespectful." When a child removes themselves from us, it is a phenomenal response. And what he did was phenomenal. He was probably feeling overwhelmed for whatever reason and did not want to yell and scream at his mother because that would have been disrespectful. So he got up and walked and isolated himself, put himself into timeout, locked himself in the bathroom. Or likely he was contemplating. That is extremely respectful. I told his mom You have a deeply respectful son. Be grateful that he knows his limitations. He knows boundaries. He understands and recognizes. He can self-regulate. He is empathic. He is humble. All right, we're running out of time here, so I'm going to move on to what's referred to as the Pygmalion effect. Pygmalion effect, so we need to understand this effect. Essentially, going back to expectations, it is this idea that expectations shape people's behaviors a particular way. Now, it doesn't have to be bad until it is, right? Because you can have an expectations that you place on a child that could lead them to improvement. However, negative expectations on other people, on people or the child, can lead them feeling diminished in value. When we're applying this phenomenon, that is the Pygmalion effect, to parenting, it describes how we as parents can potentially impact our child's growth and development. Now, yes, it depends on what kind of expectations that we place on the child. I can agree with that. But sometimes, remember, a lot of what we do in this case, the example of the parent that I just mentioned, the expectation may have good reasoning that turns out to be irrational or illogical, right? I do not expect her to be a psychotherapist or psychologist and read actions and behaviors the same way I do. But I think it's important to be aware of anything, show restraint, right? To recognize these expectations I'm referring to. So as that turns out, based on the Pygmalion effect, expectations doesn't have to be a single word uttered or expressed. Your expectations can be indicated simply by the way that you stare at the child. You know, when you give the child the stink eye, expectations are colored through the way that we outwardly express nonverbal communications. A simple gaze, body language, a gesture. These things convey our feelings and thinkings about the child or about other people. Any questions or comments about that? And I'll share with you one final concept. Okay, so please keep in mind, and this is why I say it's dangerous. Oh, it's not, I'm being overly dramatic. I apologize for that. That's my histrionic. Anyway, the problem with expectation is that the child is susceptible to becoming your expectation. Right? The child is susceptible to becoming your expectation. So there's a philosopher who is at one point I read considered the smartest human being on this planet. His name is Goethe. I think he's German philosopher, but he created he has a form of wisdom. It's referred to as Goethe's wisdom. Goethe spelled Goethe, Goethe. So he has a remedy for selfish thinking, selfishness. And he says that we treat people as if they were what they ought to be. And when you do, you help them become what they are capable of being. Another way of stating this, I say, is that if you treat a child as if they don't know anything, they become what they don't know around you. That's why many kids experience what's called functional freeze. So going back to the parent that called me yesterday, when she went into the room and she was asking him a series of questions. What are you doing? What are you up to? I'm your mom. I want to know what's going on. And I love you. And she just went on. And the child did not respond. After she was done, he got up and walked out of the room and locked himself in the bed. So that's functional freeze. So if you find that the child, or anybody for that matter, adults engage in this too, where we are preaching to someone and that person is not responding, the experience that they are engaging is referred to as functional freeze. So this should help us recognize that we need to take a couple steps back. So in the grove, it's very important to recognize that when the child is not wanting to answer the question, they're not being disrespectful. Okay? They probably feel denigrated, or they probably are confused, or lost, or anxious, or even extremely fearful, maybe depressed, maybe dissociated. So please, let's recognize this whole process of functional freeze. Okay, I got to move on to the next concept. Okay, and this will be our final concept for the evening here. So Galatea effect. I like this effect. I want you to keep this one in mind when you're in the space of the grove. Galatea. Spelled Galatea. Galatea. Galatea effect. So it is the conscious parents believe that children can learn better when they feel good about themselves. So we parent in a way that the child can have a healthy sense of who they are through providing support and awareness. That's all we're doing. One way to support the child's self-growth is to allow the child to be in charge of her own achievement. This is the cool part about the Galatea effect. For example, when I give an example of my own child, but anyway, for example, when our child was 8 years old, and she climbed an aspen tree in our backyard and that stood about 30 feet high. She got up the tree about 15 feet and says to me, "Dad, I'm taller than you." She proceeded to climb about another 10 feet and said, "Dad, I can see everything up here. It's awesome." In that moment, as I am staring at her positive expression, I could see that she appeared pleased with her effort. With each step of the way, she seemed to believe in herself that she could accomplish her expectation. So the Galatea effect is this idea that when the child can believe that she can or he can accomplish for him or herself a task, an endeavor, that belief becomes so intrinsically inspired that she becomes more curious, more exploratory, more successful in anything and everything that a child does. So my point is is the children or people around you are already doing things that are extraordinary and they need to do it without our interference. Even if they fail, it is important to allow them the peace that is their failure so that they can learn to persevere. However, their ability to be proud and take pride in their efforts is itself what will help them to accomplish success. So our job in the space is to provide as many things in that space, Paul, that we can. Puzzles, magnets, um, uh, toys, books, science, math, and then so they will initiate whatever they're interested in that space, which then, when they feel they are successful, it empowers the child to create more effort. If the child believes that she is capable of performing a task to success and has the expectation that she will be successful, she will attempt to achieve the outcome to match her belief. That's the result of the Galatea effect. So if the child believes that she's capable of performing a task, an endeavor, an activity to success, and has the expectation that she will be successful, she will attempt to achieve the outcome that will match her belief. The child goes into that activity believing in herself. That's why she's engaging in that activity. Now, if she can complete it herself and she achieves what she deems as success, she will keep working at it and she will attempt to achieve the outcome that will match her belief. All right, we're coming to the top of the hour, a little bit past, but that's okay. Okay, I'll just leave this last couple minutes. I had other thoughts, but I'll just leave these last couple minutes with comments, statements, or questions that you may have. Or not.
I'd have to double check, Con, but I think there was a study probably 20 years ago now that had to do with like math achievement, and then it was looking at gender differences. So like boys tend to do in Western cultures in our public school system, or the US, I should say, I'm only aware of the US. Boys tend to do better than girls in math assessment. And what they found was a lot of it had to do with some of the cultural stereotypes and the way math was talked about. And so I suppose it would connect with Carol Dweck, but so when they made these adjustments, some of the language they used and the approaches, you saw that adjust. So girls, I don't know what the final findings were, if it like that difference completely washed out or whatnot, but it just reminded me a little bit of what you were ending with there, and like the kid believing in themselves and how we need to be so careful with how we carry ourselves and not put them into boxes or labels.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. I think that's important to keep in mind over and over when we're in the space. And that reminded me of this study that I shared with you one time before, Paul, where they had 25 participants, 13 females, 12 males, and they decided to have them meditate for a year, but they would be isolated. So that means they had no contact with the outside world, and we're talking about white folks who are the participants here. And they found that the 13 females were able to achieve enlightenment quicker. Kind of think about this for a moment here. Many of our religious leaders in the position of power are males, because women are conceived or perceived as inferior, cognitively, mentally, psychologically, in this case, meditatively. Um, that we have to be very mindful of this Pygmalion effect. That is this whole idea that we expect or we impose expectations on certain people. And these expectations sets the sort of foundation of our belief system. Is dangerous because we're living in a world with this distorted perception of reality. So the space within the space there, the context of the grove, um, as a conscious, or rather a contrite fallibilist, we have to be cautious and constantly subject our perspective or our information or our knowledge to criticism and self-doubt. So thank you very much, guys. I'll see you next time, and then we're going to talk about, we're going to start off next session with wisdom personified, and I'll explain what that means.